So welcome to the office hours of Courtesy That Artist Popular Revolt. So we're just going to introduce ourselves before the conversation. I'm Alisa Zhulina, Assistant Professor of Drama.
I'm Amy Ruhl, Co-Director, Popular Revolt.
Alex Segade, Co-Director, Popular Revolt.
Great. So I wanted to ask you how the idea for your project came and how the context of the Marx Festival worked with it.
Well, I guess it came out of kind of conversation between the two of us. The Marx Festival invitation preceded the project. Actually, I was going to put a different project in, but for certain reasons we weren't able to do that one. So we talked to Jay about something else, and I had wanted to work with Amy since we had put together a play called Future Street that we did the year before. Amy was assistant director on that, and it was a play I wrote and directed, and we both performed in it. And so this was kind of came out of that conversation about, like, well, would you like to do something for the Marx Festival? I knew that in terms of the kind of economic critique that was possible in that context, that we would be able to come up with something. But the actual shape of the show actually came from ideas that Amy had in terms of the projection and all that kind of stuff from your work, right? I mean...
Yeah, a lot of it. I work as a motion graphics designer and operator on a TV show on BuzzFeed, and so a lot of the kind of office politics that we were talking about and neoliberal environment and their kind of solutions around making a happily integrated workforce really came from my experience working a day job.
Yeah. So you talk a little about the idea of the consent that was present in the piece.
Well, you know, there's a couple of different things that kind of came together that we were lining up and making comparisons to when we were developing the work. And on the one hand, you know, we had these kinds of like training modules that you do to, you know, learn about like workplace harassment or diversity, sensitivity training, and we were looking at all these models of that. But I had noticed a kind of resemblance to this one Lehrstück by Brecht called He Says Yes, He Says No, and in that, you know, the whole question is consent. And consent, of course, is central to the discussion around you know, sexual harassment and sex abuse and all those things, but also the question of like, what does one consent to even by entering into a situation where you're working for a company or whatever, was partly what the Brechtian kind of model makes you question, you know. So, and is it possible to ever really give consent? Like, how much freedom does one have to make a choice given the limited options available?
Right, in capitalism, how much choice do we have, or is it all economic limitations?
Exactly. So I think that's where we kind of like took it from there. And then one of the things I think that really gave the show its shape was when Amy suggested that we use some kind of technology that would, you know, operate sort of like Skype or something like that, where you bring different people's cameras together from the laptop and then project it as one, right? That's a kind of like virtual meeting space, but it seemed like it mapped onto the kinds of situations and technologies that we were talking about in the current moment that Brecht wouldn't have had, which in some ways still resembled the same kind of like weird system that he was making up with that piece. And of course, you know, that is just two options, yes or no. But we were thinking a little bit more along the lines of like a kind of like branching of different possibilities, depending on what you say yes to, then other things come out, and sort of game design. And that ended up being the structure of the piece. Yeah, so like half the play didn't get done that night.
Yeah.
Because people didn't consent to one thing or another.
Right.
We asked the audience of if they consented to the situations. And kind of the way the questions were set up were like both options are kind of not great.
It's kind of like in Brecht's play.
Yeah,
Like,
you can either die, or you can consent to dying, or, you know,
right.
ruin your mother's life,
exactly.
basically. So those, we posed kind of similarly problematic questions. But yeah, so half of the play wasn't actually seen because they had chosen other options.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
And do you ever explore in your work the issues of consent in social media, the way that today we sort of give consent or not, or whether we even have, or sometimes people forget that they kind of consent to like sharing of information.
I mean, one of the situations that ends up coming out of the scenarios is a person having basically the option between posting a kind of criticism of their workplace on Facebook, or going to this like Panera sponsored party at the office. And so there's a point at which we're like, do you consent to Facebook or Panera? And in a way, we are talking about how there's not a whole lot of choice there. I mean, one thing we were thinking about a lot, we talked about a lot, was the interface of social media, and thinking about that in relationship to the interfaces of these training modules. And we were also looking at things like dating simulators, which are kind of video games that, you know, basically give you a few options about how to, like, you know, relate to an imaginary person and maybe date that person in the imaginary world that it takes place in. So those things are all about limiting your choices and your options. And
I also think that question, either go to Panera Bread sponsored party or post on Facebook about how you're disgruntled about your work situation, kind of was getting also to how where people go for resistance now, or where they feel like they'll get the most response, whether it's just anger or, you know.
So where do you think the promise of the popular revolt lies today? I know it's a loaded question, but how do we, like, where can we revolt if social media is corporate and democracy is struggling?
I mean, I think for us, the performance space was as close as we could get at this point. For us, you know, that was like the place we had, and so making your work within the context that it actually happens in is one thing that I think is resistant to a lot of those other forces. But, you know, not to say it's not compromised. I don't know, the piece, like, the sort of conceit of the piece is that we're a startup and we are developing an app that will promote a social democracy. So there's a lot of irony baked into that, and I think we both had, like, slightly different ideas about that.
What were the differences, if I may ask, the creative differences?
Well, I don't know, maybe you should say, because I never totally...
Well, I think I'm a little bit more optimistic, or I don't know if that's even the word. I really want to live in a socialist democracy. So
me too.
It was hard for me. It was a little hard for me to have the same kind of, like, ambivalent, like, joie de vivre around, you know, being, like, making fun of it in a way. But we talked it through and realized that it's more the way the media talks about a social democracy that you feel is problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. Like, I was never making fun of that as a goal, necessarily. So what do you I
think I was getting sensitive about that.
Yeah, well, because the app that we ended up making, we made this animation that's sort of like, you know, it's all using anime characters, and then the language is actually adapted from a New York Times, like, quiz that they made that was like, are you a social democrat? And you can answer these questions. And so for me, it did have to do with the media's representation, like simplification of it. But also, I think, and this is something I got actually after talking to people who were in the audience, I need to talk to you about this one woman who I saw at Ethan's Mark's musical thing. She had seen the piece and she talked to me about it before, and she grew up in the Soviet Union and she had a lot of ideas. But she was interesting, but one of the things she said was, that her interpretation was like, we want the world to change, but we don't want to do anything. And I think that's part of what I was trying to get at. The notion that you could download an app and that would solve a problem that's already baked into the entire system that gives you the app, right? Like that to me is kind of what I was trying to get at. And at the same time, like, I do think there are ways in which, the so-called like left has a lot of work to do internally, like in-house, to kind of figure out priorities and how to talk about things. And so I was also kind of thinking about like what would it take to make the messaging like work,
without like simplifying it. Like, I know like Bernie Sanders' book got criticized for sort of flattening,
right?
But how do you explain certain concepts?
Exactly. But I wonder if simplifying is it, because people can get really into very Baroque thinking. So I don't know if simplifying is the key. I don't know what the key is, but I just am like watching what's, kind of was responding to what was going on. And I do think like if there was, like I feel like an anime that was promoting socialist democracy could potentially work in some way. Why not, right? But for whom and like what? It's probably a multi-tiered process. But I just thought the anime characters seemed perfect because they are these like kind of globally empty like avatars. And they have a kind of like weird naughtiness to them, even though they're all like so like cute. So there was just something kind of perverse about them, but it seems like that's the angle I would take.
What was the copyright issue? Because I know there's this performance called Ang Lee. There's an anime character that they took because you have to buy them, or who owns the copyright to the anime characters? Okay.
I know where they come from, and I'm sure that they wouldn't be happy about what we did.
You revolted.
Yeah, whatever, but they're good. They're good animes. I only took from the good ones.
And besides the woman from who grew up in the Soviet Union, did you get a sense of the reaction of the audience to the app or to the performance or to social democracy?
The reaction I got the most were people saying that they related so much to the kind of bad choices that they had to make every day, like a couple professors I feel like said that they really felt very close to it, and because of like the corporatization of the university, and like I didn't expect to hear that. I expected to hear more like from people that work in offices, like, wow, I feel really close to this, but it was actually a lot of university professors.
Right, with the choice that,
really
sometimes I'm like, always wondering, like, what do I say in the classroom? This how to be politically correct, not to trigger any of my students, but also to allow them to get out of their comfort zones and read new texts and see new artists without...
It seems hard.
Yeah, and while still being sensitive. It's very different. Like, when back in my day, they would just, professors would just show performances without saying, here's a trigger warning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that I can relate to as well, what choices do I make? And to always, I feel like I'm always asking for consent, and there's a lot of positive things that came out of this conversation. But I always feel like I am asking my students for their consent to introduce new material or say something new. Yeah,
that's, I identify with that. I am also a teacher, and it is something I consider, not always as well as I should. There was like the Shirley Clark film, A Scary Time. Do you know that film?
I've never seen that.
Oof, it's so amazing, but it's not, I forgot that you have to like warn everybody about it. And as it was going on, I started feeling like this like creeping dread that I hadn't said, watch out, there's going to be something disturbing. Anyway, I think that we were trying to trigger people a little bit, and like not in the sense of like, the way that term is necessarily used, but like kind of force us to confront some of the ways in which these problems are sort of diminished by the language that we're using, but then you still have to refer to them, you know. And we weren't depicting particularly traumatic events. They're actually really banal, but they're all like on the edge of it, you know. And the one training that we didn't go to, that I think if we do this, we do it again, that I'm really interested in, is like the training that's going on in elementary schools and in high schools around gun violence and how to survive gun violence, because we were looking at like examples from, like Starbucks, when they had the day that they closed all the Starbucks and did their training around, diversity, what they were calling diversity, and we were looking at, of course, Title IX training, which we've all done, and then I had kind of overlooked there's this other one, that I haven't had training in, though I suspect that's just around the corner at some point, and that would change the tenor, I think, of the show quite a bit.
I just recently went through that. We were doing fire safety on the floor of the building that I work in, and this year there's this added element, which if there's a shooter in the building, and I could see everyone's reaction, like, wow, this is now part of a routine, fire. This is where the exit is. Now we're talking about, in terms of fire safety on the floor, how to run. Right. And what to do for active shooters.
Yeah, which is like the term active shooter.
What is
even that? I'm like, how did they kind of end up on that? Because is it like an attempt to not offend the inactive shooting community? The people who just have guns on them.
Right, I'm not
concealing.
Concealed carriers.
Yeah. I wonder how that would change the
I mean, it would have changed it a lot. But I think it's like the other step. Like, I think that would have to happen at some point. It's if we were really going to go through, like, these are the protocols that we've been inundated with, and this is the world that we're kind of like, because I think on the one hand, we could talk about triggering as like a kind of violence, right? But then I also am wondering, like, well, and this is something in the show, like, what's a violence? Is like, what's this little miniaturized violence that we're talking about?
Well, often that word is really referring to a past violence, It's like, so you're trying to say, this might remind you of a violence that happened to you,
And as an artist, that's a teacher, one thing, and I think, we have our ways of navigating bureaucracy as teachers, and that's kind of something we knew we were getting into. As an artist, it's really very different, and I don't want to put the kinds of limitations on my work as an artist that I would as a teacher, but I do think that the art space is one where we can talk about those limitations, the ones that you're having at BuzzFeed, the ones that I have in the classroom. But I also worked in the tech industry during the dot-com boom in the 90s. That was my first job out of college, so we kind of were like, we were processing a lot of stuff that I think as an artist you're almost taught never to talk about, which is like the day job or the corporate kind of like how you use the skills that you use for your art in a corporate context. Like, you almost, as an artist, are sort of taught not to talk about that, which I think does have a kind of weird economic...
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, artists are supposed to somehow magically exist without, like...
the day job,
without bread and butter jobs, and those jobs do take up time, and they are compromising, but they're also, like, interesting. They're a window into... As an artist, you can actually look into this other world and then reflect on it.
So how did your experiences in tech and BuzzFeed inspire or teach you something about the work that you're creating as an artist? What is that relationship?
In this piece, we just
really
this is the mise en scène.
Yeah, I mean, I was sending him emails from my work and taking pictures around my office. And
I mean, it was like research for the world. And the thing is, we probably had the most experience with corporate world of the cast, right? We were most like telling them, well, Sing also has worked as an assistant to the C-class executives, right? But she was the only one. So I think for a lot of the others, it was like an exotic thing we were telling them about. But we also based our we played characters within it, and I was the chief operating officer, and Amy was the head of HR, and those are both internal positions within they're high up in the company, but they're like internal. They're about how's the actual company as an operation work in the office and that kind of thing, as opposed to like CEO, which is more glamorous, or CFO, which is more important. So because we were kind of just interested in like, and this may be where the Marxism came in. It was like, let's talk about the contemporary worker in these environments that we're familiar with.
Right. It's more like a managerial position where you actually deal with workers.
Yeah, exactly. It's internally.
So you're dealing with
focused.
Sort of labor. Do you find that the art world is becoming more corporate? Or there are certain trends that you're seeing from the corporate world kind of... Or is it still plays a revolt in the art world against corporatization?
Well, what do you think?
I think so. I think there's still spaces to revolt that lead to you not having a very successful career. I think that's the outcome. But yeah, I mean, you know, avoiding spaces that have, you know, like going to fringe, more outside venues and spaces where you're gonna avoid like problematic politics of corporate sponsors and things like
Participating in the Marx Festival.
But at NYU, you know.
Right.
And also, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think, I think that's about right. Like, I think there's still a lot of space in art for a kind of resistance, but, you know, you are often compromised in different ways. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure how the kind of, like, working from within works at this point, because it just is like, I mean, it's a capitalism thing. Everything can be absorbed.
Right, co-opted,
Yeah, and so when you said it about corporate world, I can't remember what it was I was thinking of, but there are so many words that kind of like float out from art discourse and end up in corporate.
Yeah. Right, creativity, there's also...
disruption. I mean, all of these like theoretical terms that can just easily be like mapped onto some kind of market idea.
Right.
Do you think they feed back into our art discourse, though? Or do you think we take from the corporate?
We did.
Well, we did, self-consciously. Yeah. But I'm trying to think about, like,
I think so.
crits and things like that. Do you think we use...
I think so. I think so. Well, it was particularly intense around the time that, like, art students were discovering accelerationism. And everything was becoming, like, this, you know, muddy... Julian Assange tinged like disruption and like, yeah, we can definitely like, let's just increase capitalism until it like explodes and maybe I'll get rich while I'm doing it, you know. I mean, they're definitely you went to school with some students who were very much invested in that model, as I recall. But I think it's now it's kind of a weird feedback loop. Maybe this has to do with social media, I don't know, but like words can slip so easily from place to place. Right.
I'm always like amazed how like the language of love, that's sort of Laura Kipnis's argument, you know, is so now in capital. So you have to love your job, have a passion for marketing.
Right.
And what corporations really want is creativity. And you have all these artists who, you know, put their designs on, you know, shoes, and it becomes like this product, right? So. There's definitely a loop. I was also going to ask a question about your choice of Brecht and the Lehrstück, and whether or not you think that theater performance can be a rehearsal for revolt in the real world. Kind of a preparation. What happens after? What happens to the audience after they leave the show?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, I'm certainly very interested in that idea. I mean, I think we connected artistically and specifically around this piece because we both have an interest in, like, the carnivalesque and the idea of collapsing the kind of artist into the audience and you know, how... I mean, popular revolted term is even, like, acknowledging that. So I think that's what I get most excited about thinking about the potential of theater and live performance. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important point. I mean, you know, like, I don't know. I mean, my previous work, a lot of it has been, particularly with this group, My Barbarian, that I work with, you know, we spend a lot of time trying to kind of grapple with things we had learned from Augusto Boal and the Theater of the Oppressed, and seeing to what degree some of those strategies and methods could be applied in an art context, to trying to kind of engage the audience in a productive way, and also engage other artists who we collaborate with, and we use the same. And so in some ways this grows out of that, like the idea of collaboration and working with other people, because I think the work itself, whether the audience sees this or not, like the work itself can be that model. Like the process can be the model in some ways, a rehearsal for a better way of working, for example. Giving people space. Like we were talking about it earlier, that we didn't like every single thing that the other performers did. Like we created the framework, and some of them responded in different ways, and like we stood behind it because it's what they wanted to do in that moment, and it made sense from their point of view, but it wasn't like all of it was stuff that we were like, it's my favorite thing I ever saw, you know. But part of what was important about the process was creating the space for people to do what they were going to do. And though we were directing, we weren't like controlling, you know. So I think that's one way that I think about like this revolution that theater can be a rehearsal for. It's actually like, yeah, in the making. It could be that. I'm always like, I'm so unsure about how I feel about some of the like promises that are made by things like the Verfremdungseffect. Like how, I don't know. I mean, I read the Benjamin's, you know, writing on Brecht, and I like Brecht's writing on Brecht better, but Benjamin's is very like clarifying and very like, this will happen, you know, like the audience member will be awakened, and then they'll go out and change the world, and you're like,
Yeah, it's like I talk to my students, the empathy argument, where they're like, and then audience members will feel empathy, and then something will change. And it's so hard to control audience reactions, because you have so many theorists. That's like the dream of the theater theorist. Like, I will have a formula, like Brecht, like, I will have this formula, I'll do A, B, C, and there actually be D. And same in film, like, as a montage. If I do A plus B, the audience members will get C. And I'm wondering, like, how much of your work is kind of speculating what the audience will do, and how much of you like, okay, this is we have freedom for it to go in ways that we're not planning. So could you envision what the audience, the work of the audience?
Well, we certainly talked a lot about how to address them, and
it was really an issue.
It was an issue for a while. Because, you know, I'm an audience member that sometimes I just want to sit and passively watch something. You know? Like, and that is all I gave my consent for by entering the theater. So, you know, leave me alone, please.
Exactly.
So I was very nervous about how do we do this in ways that don't make people feel like, oh, are they going to come talk to me?
Or worse, like make me do something stupid that I didn't.
Or take away my stuff.
Take away my stuff, or like make me make their art for them.
I
was worried about that one. It's like you paid, you know, this was free, so it was whatever, but you know, you pay X amount of money, and then you tell them like now they have to go do your work. Like, what's that about? You know? I mean, I think in this case we kind of did limit the interaction so that it would be like relatively painless. Like we did it. We had an applausometer. By the way, I broke my iPad yesterday. I dropped it. This is my third one that I've shattered. But anyways, on my iPad, and it was just an app that would track the applause. You know, so that's not asking a whole lot from the audience. You know, but it's really just asking like, are you paying attention? You know. And then we had these small moments where different cast members would go out and talk to one person in the audience about the dilemma, and then they'd come back and report, and based on the sort of votes of those 3 audience members that the actors talked to, we would figure out whether we were consenting or dissenting. So we wanted to make it really just about extending this question to them, but it wasn't about them having to perform, because then I think you are asking for a different kind of labor from the audience.
I totally agree. And they were impacting literally what we performed. So it's kind of exciting to see what they would choose.
Yeah. And honestly, it wasn't how I thought.
Yeah,
what surprised you the most about this audience?
I thought that they would... Our first question is basically we lay out these terms of, you can take a $35 an hour job guaranteed for 6 weeks, no benefits. And so we pose that question, will you take this job or do you not consent to neoliberal capitalism?
Right, those are your options.
And our crowd decided to dissent, right?
Right, I think they did, yeah.
Which I didn't expect, because to me, if I have to, or if I need to take a job, $35 an hour, I mean, I have done that before. It's but, we probably had a lot of independently wealthy artists in the audience.
I don't know.
Always the art audience.
It was weird. I mean, every time we would test it, we would get slightly different answers, and then with this one, it was, that one was one. And then later, I can't remember what the second one was, but I think they decided to bring cake to the white people. Yeah. That was the weirdest one.
Oh, what was that?
Well, the second tier is sort of around, first one is really do you consent to neoliberalism? And then the second tier questions were more about identity. And we kind of created a scenario in the office, which was sort of based on something that had happened in your office, where it was a diversity party was happening. So all the people, and this was about sort of the misuse of the term diversity, or the kind of way that it's come to stand for non-whiteness, but nobody knows how to talk about it, so they just say diversity. Right. And so it was sort of everybody in the office who has diversity go to the main room for a cake party. Everyone who does not have diversity has to stay at their desks. And so we wrote 2 scenes. One which was the white people at their desk, and the other one was the people of color at the people of color party. And in the white people one, somebody wanders by who's can you tell me where the diversity party is? Where's the cake, basically? And they're well, you can't go there because you're white. And that person's no, I'm actually not white. Anyway, where's the party? And then as the person's leaving for the party, the white people are kind of can you bring us back some cake? And so the question becomes do you bring the cake back or not? And the audience said yes, which I was surprised by. But I don't know that I would have, but I think, I don't know, Malik said he would totally bring the cake back.
I could see where they would, because it's who cares about this cake?
Yeah.
This cake is not doing anything for me, right. So might
as
well.
Is it the entire cake or a piece of cake?
Piece of cake.
Oh, piece of cake. Okay.
Very
not all of the cake.
It's a yellow and red and green cake that they put a little white piece of paper over, and they take it back to the desk. Just that in the elevator. You have to take it in the elevator with you. So it's sort of embarrassing. But anyway, they all decided. There were a lot of them that were like that. There was I just couldn't totally. But to me, that's the opposite of saying I don't consent to neoliberalism. You know what I mean? And so it's also kind of whatever happened in that moment. You know, who knows why those decisions were made.
Do you think audience members acted in a certain way because they knew they were attending the Marx Festival? That is, some of their decisions were what's I want to be the best Marxist in the room.
Probably that was why the first one happened, but the second one not the best Marxist. Or maybe it is. Maybe it's cake for everyone.
Yeah.
Regardless of your whiteness.
No identity.
Well, we have that.
It's very Bernie Sanders. Yeah.
Yeah, because there was that DJ Marxist party, and
I wanted to go to
the
that.
slogan was "Let them have cake, let us eat cake." It was something about everyone gets cake, so maybe that was everyone was thinking about the sharing of the cake.
I mean, there was a line in the diversity scene where the person said that they felt bullied by cake, and they want to be able to live truly and authentically without having to eat cake, and that's kind of where I am on that one. Especially in the offices, all the sugary food they try to use to lure you into worse and worse situations.
Right, and all these big corporations like Facebook, Google, now we know is Amazon.
Oh my
like
God,
very,
Amazon's
I know,
coming.
yeah, it's coming. So and all this, right? Everything happens in the building. Like they have the gym and the food and they order food and all these perks and you just never leave the building.
Yeah.
So. I don't know. I wonder if one can do a performance piece just like in the building, you never leave.
Yeah.
And what happens?
Yeah. I mean, we kind of are doing that, but I mean, that was something we were thinking about for sure. We even have a karaoke party sequence of sort of like office karaoke that's like demanded of them. Yeah, because I think that's your experience in mine too.
Yeah, I was very interested in how these, especially like tech and startup companies, they really lure you in by like free lunches and snacks and things like that, and yoga classes and meditation and wellness, and there's self-care tutorials, and it's like what they're just absorbing more and more of your time. And to me, if I'm in an office, you're getting billed, like, or that's labor, like. But a lot of these people, I'm freelance, but a lot of these people are getting paid, a salary, and like they're living their lives at the office, and it's just insane to me. It's like this constant addition of like flex time and like constant adding of labor hours through what usually would be leisure.
Right.
But it's like, we want your leisure inside the building.
Where it's like
you're going to play ping pong with us.
It's like maintenance of the worker. So the health, the mental health is not so much like this is what you do in your free time. It's like so that you are the most productive, creative worker.
Absolutely.
We're going to give you this package so that we can work you even more. We want to get that surplus labor out of you.
Exactly. And give you free food that really they're probably like saving money on giving you this rather than just paying their workers more.
Right, eating at the desk.
Yeah.
The companies, right? You're eating at the desk and you food at the desk.
Yep. They have foosball at...
Probably. They've got everything.
We had it at Yahoo. I don't know. It was a certain kind of person that wanted to play that.
Wait, what is that?
It's that one where you go like this and you play like opposite like soccer teams, and there's these little doll people.
Okay.
That one.
It's competition. Teaches you competition, so that you...
There was kind of like a foosball championship at my office.
You can imagine that.
I don't know. That was not one of the things I engaged in.
So what's the future of this of the piece?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
What would you do besides? I know you mentioned like maybe introducing gun control, case studies, but what else?
Well, we're trying to figure out what we want to actually do with it. I mean, we were just talking about the way in which it could work within a gallery context outside of a theater per se. The setup, now that it's one of those things, like now that we know how to make it work, because it took really up until the day that we were doing it to really know what it was going to be, and thankfully, like, everything worked out.
Yeah.
Dress rehearsal was rough.
Yeah.
But the actual performance was kind of great, and I think partly because dress rehearsal was rough. But technically, we know what it is. Thematically, we were much clearer on how it happens, and the way that the cast operated. It's not dependent on any of them necessarily being in it, so it's kind of more flexible in terms of who the cast is. So we're looking at other ways to present it and what that would do, and something like a gallery context, it would probably have to be shorter, a couple of things like that, but the actual setup is really flexible and could work in different environments. The other thing we were talking about is like getting it out of New York, because I'm curious about how it would resonate in other situations.
San Francisco.
Sure. Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
Because
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marin County. Yeah. I mean, I think it would be interesting in California. I'd be curious to see how it would change, depending on the kind of audience response that you're getting. I don't know. We had like a sense right before we had a little debate because I was like maybe somebody wrote to us asking like what the final email blast should say or something, and I had this weird moment where I was like, it should have a trigger warning.
Yeah, and I was very anti-trigger.
Wait, what would the trigger warning be?
That's the problem. Like, we were like, I don't know.
There might be a revolt.
I was like, you might get triggered is the trigger warning, or this piece is about triggering. So don't get triggered by the conversation around triggering.
Like I said that the only people that might get triggered are socialists.
That's true. Kind of true. So yeah, we were like, no trigger warning. But I am curious about, like, I think it could do. I think it'd be interesting to see it, like, do a sort of small tour of college campuses. Is one place. But I also would be interested, to see, like, in an art context how it would be seen, because the video art element is actually really there with the piece, and it uses the technology that's being used for offices in a way that's pretty interesting. So I think that would be an interesting context.
Yeah. I could definitely see an interesting feedback that we got from a lot of people was they said I could have kept watching. I mean, it was a long show. It was like 2 hours, and they were like, it felt like TV. Like I could have just kept watching it and watching it. So I'm like, maybe it should just be longer.
Right.
And just
that's
like
true.
become like endurance
24 hours?
level. Yeah, like where
That's
it really
true.
is work.
That's true.
And
I like that idea.
And I also would.
That's better.
Yeah, I think the end. We could,
Yeah.
I think we could have alternate endings, you know, like maybe fascism, or maybe like you have, now we're just brainstorming, but now you know, you have the kind of, the downloadable socialism, which is like bullshit socialism, basically, where you don't do any work, and then what is the actual popular revolt version, where what is the work? You know?
Yeah, I think it could be a lot more complex, the system that we were working with. And the way that we did it, it was really, you know, because everyone's on laptops and the audience was seated on the sides, so they're just looking at people at their desks. The projection is how you can see the faces of everybody. We had these scripts on each laptop, so depending on what happened in the scene prior, we would just pull one of those up in a PDF format, and so people would just be reading. They'd rehearsed all of them, but they didn't have to memorize them. It was kind of hard to imagine trying to get them to memorize 2 scenes that one of which might get done, you know? So I was kind of like, I mean, people have done that, but I didn't want to have to do that. So in a way, it's like the thing is both a camera and a teleprompter at the same time. And you really can't tell that people are reading it. They're familiar enough that they knew what they were saying. So what I'm saying is that it could kind of extend infinitely. You know, you could build a whole bunch of different architectures for, you know, how this line goes potentially, or how it leads back over here, and it could go on for quite a long time. You could loop back. There could be repetition, which I think in the original Lehrstück it was very repetitive, actually. So yeah.
And if you do it for, I'm just brainstorming with you now. If you did it for several days, people would come back probably.
Yeah,
be like,
because they could see another.
Yeah,
they could see a totally different show.
Or make other choices.
Like
that would be a chance for them. Like, I did this choice.
Right.
Now I want to not consent to this.
Yeah. I mean, people do that with the dating simulators. They play it a second time and then they choose other things to see what would happen.
Right.
I don't have the.
It's kind of like in real dating, like where you come back, you text back.
Right. Try it again. Another way.
But that reminds me of self-help books too. Like, I don't know if that played a role in the dating simulators. Like there's certain rules. Like, you do this, you do that, and there's different schools of how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think there's a lot of space for dating simulators to get better, but because a lot of them are kind of adapted from anime and manga and stuff like that, and they're pretty simplistic in their thinking about, like, dating. I don't know. That's not very real. But the one that I was most interested in was Dream Daddy, which was an American thing, and it's this dating simulator where you're a dad who's dating other dads, and it's kind of like, I don't know, surprisingly engaging and kind of fun and very popular. And one of the things one of the innovations it had was, like, you create your own avatar, and it can be either a cis male or a trans guy, and then you're dating these other characters who could be kind of either way too, depending on how you think about that character. But just even the premise is so weird in a way, like unusual, I guess. It's like all these guys have kids, and they're all going to date each other, and it's never really this, like, the word gay never shows up once in the whole thing. It's just this, like, assumption that of course you're going to try to date Craig, and that one the characters are kind of complex, and there's a lot of weird things you have to do. You can't be too eager with some of the dads because you'll scare them off. Like you can't sleep with some of them right away. You have to really build
connection.
The connection to Craig. Because Craig was my focal point when I played it. But yeah. But anyway, I wonder how that one. I wonder how influenced it was by things like the love language, or whatever. You know, the 5 love languages or whatever. Like it seemed like it had all that in there somewhere.
Right. Then we have the language of work that seeps into dating and love. So we got to work on our relationship, or like I want to invest in this relationship.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
What's in it for me? Laura Kipnis against love, like she's really good at showing this sort of how the language of love seeps into our workplaces, and the language of work seeps into our relationships. Where you go to therapy, because we work this out.
Working on this.
We're working.
I never really understood that. I've been in a relationship for like a long time, and I've never understood it when people say we're working on our relationship. I'm always like, what?
Is it working then?
I'm like, how does that work? How does that work? I work with my partner on work, but then we have a very clear line, like, no work right now. Because that would be hard. We will work on, like, a bookshelf or something together.
But not the relationship.
No, because I don't know how you do that. I don't even know how you do that.
Is there any, when you're in the piece, we're exploring sort of what happens with free time? Because for Marx, one of the most important things is that when we reach this communist utopia, we will have free time that we can, build a new future or do what we want to do.
And the part that always sticks out as one of the most beautiful things with Marx for me, or beautiful ideas to get to, is like the idea that you won't just do one job.
Right, that you can be you can fish.
You can be a fisherman in 1 hour, and you can do
like in theater.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we really were kind of dealing more with the idea that all free time gets absorbed into the office, but that is an interesting thing to consider.
I mean, I guess that would be the utopia, because we never got to that part. Like, we had on the original schematic for the play that it ends in utopia after social democracy or fascism as the two possibilities. But we couldn't figure out what a utopia was, and we would like try to act it out and do all these things, and it always kind of hit a brick wall. And maybe that would be a kind of return to that, because we never got there. It was weird. Nobody could picture it.
Well, you gave the restriction though that you still had a job. I remember.
Yeah. But it could have been multiple jobs.
No, it's true. I didn't have
just
any imagination around it, I have to admit.
Yeah. It's just funny because I've done... There's like an exercise where you... it's kind of based on a Boal exercise called Hours of the Day that is supposed to like break down how much time you spend doing what, and if you just call out each of the hours of the day and just act out what you're doing on that day, then at the end you reflect on like how you're spending your time. So we tried that with Utopia, and I've had varying degrees of success with this before, but this time it was really funny how, partly because we were all the performers were so immersed in this corporate world, and I was like, okay, well, let's try to imagine a utopia, but you still have a job. Like, you still have to work in some capacity, and I guess, that limitation just capsized the whole thing, and nobody could get to much of a utopia. Or people would be like, well, I'm on a beach. I mean, it's really vague,
I'm working on a beach.
I work on a beach, It was super vague. Yeah.
Right, the imagination of utopia.
It's not where people are right now. It's funny.
Well, it's
we're trying to resist fascism. Like, we're on this like, step one.
Right, but that's the thing. Is like, how do... This is the problem, right? Because if you're in a position of resistance... You kind of need it's kind of Fassbinderian. It's like you need the oppressor to be in that position, right? But if you're promising something else, which is what, often the kind of dictator is promising, like either you're with me or everybody dies, right? Like, but if you're trying to resist without that promise, without a kind of shared goal, it is hard. Like, that's probably where we're at, but... I don't know, I've just even noticed this in, like, fantasy and genre fiction. Like, a dystopia has displaced and almost become the utopia. Like if we look at sort of trends in utopian fiction, for example, like there hasn't been a lot lately. And yet the dystopia is pictured as this like total rupture where at least you're kind of free from certain structures, or this kind of individualist figure can now emerge, you know, which is not what I'm into, but that's the thing that people think of. And like utopia became a picture because that would require like cooperation with others and things you can't even nobody knows about. I don't know, it's weird. I'm trying to figure out what to do about that, but it's an uphill battle. Yeah, cool.
Is there anything that we haven't covered? I know about the work that I haven't asked that you wanted audience to know about the process of the work itself.
Well, I guess just that it was like collaborative on all kinds of levels, so that like Amy and I worked pretty closely on writing this text that was like a framework, but the other artists made their own pieces in response to that. And so there, you know, we had these sort of interruptions is how I saw them, but I think in some ways they were the work, they were the piece. And that they kind of created their own, they created different meanings that we haven't talked about. Like different things came out of that. I mean, Latasha Diggs did a piece where she talked about housing very directly in New York City. Miguel Gutierrez's piece was a dance piece with water bottles that I worked closely with him in developing, but like it's kind of, because it was a dance work, it was like it sort of slips out of some of the like kind of discourse that we're talking about, you know. And then Singh's piece, I don't know how you would describe that, but she was playing definitely with kind of like fitness culture in relationship to these other things.
And kind of the false promises of self-care language.
And then Alison Kizu Blair's piece was this sort of like poem, spoken word thing that was about being a bartender. So it was a different kind of labor that sort of like emerges in the middle of the piece and sort of reorients the conversation for a second, and which is something that the piece was able to do. Like by creating those little spaces, we could have, in a sense, like they're not the audience, but in a sense they were our first audience with these other performers, you know. And so there is a kind of like, you know, like some space to talk about what they were thinking about instead of it all being like our experience. Yeah.
So it starts with sort of your collaboration, then you sort of invite them. Okay.
Yeah, we invited them to, when we were really building the piece, like even the scenes themselves, we would workshop with them. Like we'd find like with the scene with the porn scene, now Amy wrote a scene where there's somebody wants to propose a room in the office where people can watch porn. That's like kind of a break room, but it's like one person at a time. And it's like dark room.
Dark room.
And we had kind of didn't know, once that part was written, it was like, wait, where are we going with this? So we kind of would have the performers come and like act out the scene and then start to ad-lib, and from there we would generate the rest of the material.
Yeah, that was very helpful, actually. It was just having people discuss each topic that we had, and then the dialogue started filling itself in.
Yeah, it was interesting. Same thing with the healthcare one, and definitely with both of the creepiness and
The creepiness.
Well, we had to have that. It was kind of uncomfortable, but it was fun that day. When we had them act out this whole scenario of like, what if one of your coworkers is creepy? Like, how do you even determine what that is?
Oh.
Yeah, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
What does it even mean? Like, and who is this person? And then what do you do? Because it's like on that line where it's like it's not quite determined yet that this is like anything. It's just something's wrong, you know? And the paranoia that creates. Right. And so on both parts, you know, because the person's like realizing all of a sudden that they are being seen as a creep. So acting that out created a weird tension in the group for a little while. Because the guy who played the creep kind of took it personally, I feel like.
Lorenzo.
Yeah.
Or like,
He was like, why do I have to be the creep again?
Because I'm the cis straight man.
I don't know. You're just really good at that.